In this tutorial, we will be demonstrating how rules work with the VDI toolkit. So first, let's talk about the different rule types. There's two of them. So first, we have session rules, which are rules that are evaluated from session connect to session end that update anytime session information is updated, like connecting from a different client, etc. Next, we have session state rules. These are rules that are evaluated session state changes such as connected, disconnected, reconnected, and session ended. When creating rules, you specify only at what state changes should the rule be evaluated and apply. Next, I want to talk about the anatomy of a rule. So we have a name, a description, a weight. We choose the session state, and that only applies to session state change rules. Qualifier, we choose qualifiers, or we assign it as a global rule, and we update the configuration. Now, the weight of a rule is used for rule precedence when processing rules. The weight allows us to specify which rules should take precedence when two rules affect the same item. So an example would be a default rule that blocks USB redirection and then creating a second rule that allows it for a specific Active Directory group. With that second rule, we'd want to give it a higher weight. Next, talking about rule qualifiers and whether or not it's a global rule. So if a rule is a global rule, it will apply to all sessions unless overridden with a higher weight rule. If not a global rule, rule qualifiers will be used to determine if the rule should be applied or not. Next, I want to talk about the rule qualifier type. So we have Active Directory user, which is pretty self-explanatory. That's just a user. We have Active Directory group, which would be a group of Active Directory users. We have client, which is the workstation that they're connecting from to their virtual desktop. We have client groups that we can assign with clients. We have custom. We also have VDI session information. We have virtual desktop, and we have virtual desktop groups. Please note, for more information on each rule qualifier and its purpose, please watch the video tutorial on rule qualifiers. Next, let's talk about rule qualifier classifications. So with rule qualifier classifications in the rule, we have all qualifiers, which means that any qualifier that's listed under all qualifiers, it should evaluate to true for the rule to apply. So if I had 3 rule qualifiers in the all qualifiers section and one of those evaluated to false, the rule would not apply. Next, we have any qualifiers, which means that any of the listed qualifiers must evaluate to true for the rule to apply. So if I had the same example, 3 rule qualifiers listed under any qualifiers, if any one of those evaluated to true, then the rule would apply. But please note, when combining both any and all rule qualifiers, that if an any rule qualifier qualifies, that whole rule will be applied. Next, I want to talk about negating a rule qualifier. So you cannot negate VDI session information or custom rule qualifiers. You should just create another one of those rule qualifiers to meet your need. Now, all the other rule qualifiers you can negate. And when negating a rule qualifier, it evaluates to true if it would normally be evaluated to false, and vice versa. So an example would be creating a rule that allows USB redirection for an Active Directory group, and then creating another rule denying USB redirection using the same Active Directory group as a rule qualifier, but negating it. Next, we'll talk about the configuration. And with configuration, that is basically where items are to be configured and associated with the rule. So this is what the rule is going to be doing. So up next, we will demonstrate managing rules using the VDI toolkit. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. And what we want to do is go ahead and navigate to the management console. And so I actually have that running on a virtual desktop. So I'll go ahead and open that up, and I'll open up the management console. All right, once that's open, I'll go ahead and expand. And just to kind of show you here, so we have this rules section, and you'll notice we have rule items, and then we have our 2 rule types, session rules and session state rules. So rule items are sometimes needed for the configuration portion of rules. And then sometimes the rules do not need rule items such as like idle timers or anything like that. You can actually just configure those within the rule itself. Okay, so just to show you, for an example, I'm going to use removable storage. So I'm going to go to rule items and removable storage. And I'm going to show you here, I already have two rule items created, one that allows all removable disks and one that denies all removable disks. So then I'll go ahead and I'll go to session rules, removable storage. We'll see I don't have any rules currently created, so we can go ahead and create one. So I'll first give it a name and a description. So I like to name it so it's easy to search later on if need be, or it makes sense when you're seeing what the rule is to understand what the rule's doing. So what I'll do is I'll put this. Okay. And so we can check a global rule here, and just remember global rules apply to all sessions. And basically, since this is the default, so I'm just pretending that in my environment, I want a default that I don't allow removable storage devices at all. So I'll go ahead and check global rule and then hit add. When you hit add in a rule section, it'll open up the rule edit window, and then we can see here, and we can also modify the weight too if we wanted. So when dealing with this, I like to start with the default case and then work out to the edge cases. So the default case would be whatever's going to apply to most people. So I'm going to say in my environment, most people are not going to need access to removable storage, and I'll start with the lowest weight possible for that rule. That way, when I add additional ones, I can give them higher weights and they'll override this rule. So I'm going to leave the weight at 0. Now, just so you know, if I uncheck global rule, you'll see it then adds the option to add qualifiers, and there's our all qualifiers and any qualifiers like we talked about before. So I'll go back and I'll go ahead and check this to a global rule. And then now I'll go ahead and navigate to the configuration portion. So now we need to configure this. So for this, I'm going to want to add the deny all removable disks, and I've done that here. And in certain cases like this one, you can add multiple if you wanted to, as there's things to deny external USB CD-ROM drives, etc. You could create those and then add them as well too. But for this, I'm only going to add this one. So now I have my rules set up because I have it as a global rule, name, description. I have my weight at 0. And then in my configuration, I have it set to deny all removable disks. So I'll go ahead and hit update. And then afterwards, I can go ahead and do a search, and we can see my rule here that it's been created. Next, what we'll do is, let's say now I want to allow USB storage, but I want to allow it for a particular user or an Active Directory group or whatever. So we'll go ahead and create a rule, and then I'll give it a name and description. Okay. This I won't want to check global rule because I'm only going to want it to apply in certain scenarios. So I'll go ahead and hit add. And then now it'll open up the rule edit window. And from here, I'll see I have my options for my qualifiers. So let's remember here that if I go to all qualifiers and I add multiple all qualifiers for any one of the rule qualifier types that we discussed earlier. Now, please note, for more details on setting these rule qualifiers up and the specifics of them, please watch the video tutorial on rule qualifiers. So in this case, it wouldn't make sense, right, to use all qualifiers because I'm going to create multiple scenarios that it would have to be. The only way that this would necessarily make sense is if I wanted to use an Active Directory group and then negate it, like that, or an Active Directory group that allows them and then negate it. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and go to any qualifiers, which remember, if any of these qualifiers that we add, and we can add as many as we want to a rule, if any one of them evaluates to true, it's going to actually take and apply that rule. So what we'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll go to Active Directory User, and then I can go to and add a user. So I'll add a user here, and then here's where we have the option to negate. So basically what that would mean right now is the way we're setting up the rule is that if this user was logged into a virtual desktop, it would apply this rule. Now, if I negate it, then if this user logs into a virtual desktop, this rule would not apply. But anybody else that logged in that wasn't this user, it would apply to them. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So I'll go ahead and uncheck the negate. And then from here, we can go ahead and set up our configuration. So I'll go ahead and hit the allow removable disk. So I have the allow removable disk. I have my qualifier with my user, and I can come back and add multiple users if I want to. And then the next thing we need to do is we have a problem right now still, because we have a default rule to deny, and it has the equal weight of this rule. So the deny will take precedence over this rule. So what we want to do is make sure that this rule will take precedence. So we can easily do that by giving it a higher weight. I can just click 1 and it's a higher weight rule now, and this one will take precedence over the other one if it qualifies. So then we can hit update. I can hit search, and then we can see that there. So with this rule right here, oh, wrong one. With this rule right here, so the default right now as it's set up is any user that would log into our virtual desktop environment, it's going to be denied to allow them to use removable storage devices. But if any one of these 6 users that we added here logs in, they will actually have permission to use removable storage devices. And that's because this rule has a higher weight and will override that other rule whenever it qualifies. Now, granted, if somebody logs in, it's not one of these 6 users, this rule, like I said, is not going to qualify, and it's going to immediately apply the other rule, which is the deny. I hope you found this tutorial useful, and thank you.